A staff member on President Trump's 2016 presidential campaign has filed a federal lawsuit alleging both racial and gender discrimination. According to court documents, Alva Johnson claims that she was paid less than her male and white colleagues. She also accused President Trump of unwanted advances that mirror what was described in that infamous Access Hollywood tape. Here to discuss the lawsuit is Johnson's attorney, Hassan Zavareei. Thank you so much, Hassan, for being here. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Crystal.
Could you just lay out for folks what your client alleges took place between herself and the president?
Sure. So Ms. Johnson was a staffer who was responsible in part for arranging for these RVs that were traveling across Florida, serving as mobile offices. And Mr. Trump was there for the rollout of the inaugural RV, which had his face emblazoned on the side of it, and then for a rally afterwards. And it was raining, and he went inside the RV with a few other staffers. And after signing autographs and taking selfies with some of the volunteers and staff, he left. He was leaving the RV, and on his way out, he exchanged pleasantries with Ms. Johnson, and then grabbed her hand and reached in and kissed her on the side of her mouth.
And so she says that there were witnesses there. There were people in the car who would have seen what happened. Now, they've all denied seeing what took place. Are they not telling the truth, or do you think they weren't in a position to be able to see what occurred?
No, they saw what happened. Well, two of them saw what happened. The third so-called witness wasn't even in there, so she's clearly not telling the truth when she claims that nothing happened because she wasn't there and wasn't in a position to see it. And Ms. Johnson has videotape showing who was in the RV and who was not.
Did Ms. Johnson tell anyone contemporaneously at the time what had happened?
She did, yes. She told her, she immediately called her partner, her significant other at the time, and then she called her parents both and talked to both of them in tears.
Why did she continue, though, on the campaign after this incident occurred, even though it troubled her? When did she step away? Why did she step away? And what made her decide to come forward now?
So she did. She stayed on for about another month and a half, not really knowing how to contextualize and understand what had happened to her. She knew that it was inappropriate and she felt uncomfortable about it, but she didn't really know what it meant until the Access Hollywood tape came out. And when she heard that, she immediately felt like Trump was basically explaining to her and to the rest of the world exactly what he meant, that this was his MO for sexual assault, that it wasn't something else, that it really was as inappropriate as she felt it was at the time. And at that point, she left the campaign and never went back. She moved out of campaign housing. She tried to hire a lawyer. She started seeing a therapist. But unfortunately, the lawyer, after a few weeks, said that he couldn't take the case because of business reasons. And at that point, shortly afterwards, Trump was elected president. And at that point, she decided to stay on with on the Trump train, as it will.
Address that piece, because the other part of what is being alleged here is racial and gender discrimination. Ms. Johnson says she was paid less than the white guys who were working with her on the campaign doing the same job. So I see the fallacy in this idea, but why don't you dispel the myth for the audience? Is it inconsistent that he would try to kiss her, that he would want to be close to her in that way, and also pay her less? Are those two things inconsistent with each other?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, you know, I think one of the things that's really important about this case and this story is that Ms. Johnson is a black woman, and that for so long, black women in our society have been denigrated and mistreated and sexualized and treated as less than. And part of that is sexual assault. Black women have been victims of sexual assault since they were introduced to our country through the nation's original sin of slavery. And so the notion that there's somehow something inconsistent about sexually assaulting an African American while also degrading her and treating her less than her white counterparts is nothing new.
And talk to us about the evidence that you believe shows that Ms. Johnson was discriminated against based on her race and gender.
So there's two pieces of the evidence. There's anecdotal evidence of, and this is legally required, you need to have some sort of anecdotal evidence of racial animus, and she experienced that throughout the campaign. People making racially charged comments, misogynistic comments. Well, for example, there was one senior campaign official who told her, you know, all the other black people that I know are weird, but you're not weird. And then that same woman went and told other people that Alva was weird. So, you know, and referring to a Indian woman as a dot head, you know, the sort of another person saying that that Michelle Obama was a tranny. These sorts of comments that were sort of pervasive in the campaign. So that's one piece of it, is the anecdotal evidence of racial bias. And the other piece of that is actually the statistical evidence, and you have to compare people's pay. So what we did was we looked at Ms. Johnson's pay and compared it to men and white staffers to see where she stood. And this was the first time that she learned that she was being underpaid, is after she retained us, and we did that analysis. And let me just give you a couple of examples. There was a guy who was a masseuse who was advertised on, you know, some of these back pages of various online service pages, and that guy was making a couple $1,000s more than her. There was a high school graduate. He was actually started as an intern, and after he graduated from high school, immediately was making more than this woman who'd been in professional life for many, many years. So that's the evidence that we have and that we're going to use to show that she was discriminated against based on her gender and her race.
And what is the legal standard that you have to meet here?
Well, that's by preponderance of evidence. We will need to show that these comparators exist, that there are people who are in the exact same position as her who were paid more than her. Does
Ms. Johnson have, on the anecdotal evidence, does she have that documented? Does she have it recorded? Does she have backup for that piece?
No, that's all going to be testimonial evidence. We'll get into discovery, and hopefully we'll find more of that, and maybe we will find documentation of that.
And what has the response to Ms. Johnson been personally, and how's she doing right now? I mean, this is not someone who's been in the national spotlight. Now suddenly she is in the national spotlight. How has that been for her personally?
It's been hard. She's a very tough woman. She's very brave, and it's been really an honor working with her. But she's under an incredible amount of stress. You know, we've had to take her family away from their homes so that they will be safe. Her youngest son is not in school right now because she's afraid of the bullying that he might experience if he was back in school. And so it's been tough, but I'm confident that she's going to work her way through it with the help of friends and family and other allies.
And so what are the next legal steps? What does the timeline look like?
Well, it's interesting. The first thing we're supposed to do is serve the president. It's pretty easy to serve the campaign, which is one of the defendants. To serve the president of the United States is no easy task. So we contacted our regular service provider, and he said, well, this is not so easy to do. You can't just walk into the White House and try and serve. So that's the first step. Hopefully we'll be able to get that done. And then once we serve, what we expect is going to be a motion to compel arbitration and to shut her up under the non-disclosure agreement, the NDA, which is another, I think, very important piece of this case.
You know, talk about that piece, because we've heard some about how all of the campaign workers and all of now the White House officials have been made to sign these NDAs. Is that unusual on a campaign, and is that going to be an issue, a legal issue, a legal barrier here?
It is going to be, I think it's going to be the threshold, to answer the last question, it's going to be the threshold issue. I think that once we can get past that will allow us to move forward with the case. With respect to whether it's usual, it's my understanding that it's not usual, that I've never heard of this before, and people who have more experience with campaigns than I do have never seen anything like this. And it's, you know, it's not just the campaign. It's, you know, he had everyone in his orbit signing this NDA or an NDA very similar to it. He has unpaid interns have to sign this NDA. People working in the White House today have to sign this NDA. And the reason that we're confident that we're going to be able to beat this NDA is because it is so broad, so vague, so unconscionable.
Well, and I would think an NDA can't be used to cover up criminal conduct, would be my layman's guess of the situation as well.
That's one of our big arguments.
All right, Hassan, thank you. Appreciate you being here. We'll have more Rising after this.